All right, Dr. Bill, I'm so excited to have you on the show. A mutual friend referred you to my podcast. He said, "Hey, you guys have a lot of in common and a lot alike, and you would probably hit it off." So I'm really excited for where this conversation might go today.
Yeah, I'm thrilled to be here. Me too. Me too.
So before we get too crazy here, kind of tell my listeners who you are, what you do, and like what got you doing with what you're doing.
Sure, it's a crazy story, really. I am, I'm a part of the ancestral health community now. It started though. I started as an archaeologist. I'm a prehistoric and experimental archaeologist, and all of my research is focused on our dietary past, and most importantly, and I hope we get a chance to talk about this in depth today. Most importantly, the technologies and the approaches that we as humans have invented over millions of years to take food, and in most cases, food that we have no biological business eating, and turning that food into its safest and most nourishing forms possible for our bodies. And it's a much longer story than that. But as an archaeologist, what we do is we study obviously dead people, but we study dead people by looking at things that they've left behind, things that they've done. So it makes a lot of sense for me to have this approach where we're looking at the tools that people created to help them access food, help them cook food, help them store food, help them prepare food. And what I think is most powerful about the approach that I have to this is the idea that we may be looking at something that's 1,000,000 years old, or 200,000 years old, or even 50,000 years old, but they have real incredible powerful messages for how we can approach food today. Because what's incredibly interesting is we live in 300,000-year-old bodies, essentially, modern day Homo sapiens, beings that look just like us, same brain size, same body size, same gut size, first appeared about 300,000 years ago. And although there's been certainly some changes, most of them have been environmental more than genetic, but there have been some changes. Essentially, how we deal with food inside of our bodies biologically is the same. Our nutritional requirements are the same. So looking back into the past to understand the diets that built us as a species is incredibly relevant even today in 2021. So I grew up hunting and fishing and trapping and camping, and a love for the outdoors. My mother and my grandmothers had me in the kitchen. I've always had a love for food. And I have a very long sort of story about college failing out and dropping out and all sorts of other things, but tons of different majors, not really sure what I wanted to do. But the entire time I always knew diet and health were incredibly important to me. And in large part due to the fact that I had an incredibly unhealthy relationship with food for most of my life. I was an overweight kid, and then I was a college Division I wrestler, which is a completely different unhealthy relationship with food. And then after wrestling, I became an overweight adult with all sorts of chronic inflammation and other sorts of issues related to my weight and my diet, and tried just about every fad diet in South Beach and Weight Watch, everything that you can imagine. And finally now have been able to bring together, my need for a healthy lifestyle, my need to feed my family healthy food, and, my passions and interests with the past and with technology and with cooking.
Boy, I love all that, and I can totally relate. I spent a little while doing some bodybuilding, and that definitely changed my look on food completely.
Sure.
So I can understand all of that, especially because from a young age, I was also kind of a round child, and I was extremely active. I wouldn't say I was overweight, but in the back of my mind, I always had this need to want to look a certain way. And I think we as a population are kind of programmed that way now. I mean, if you look at it, everything that we're around says that we need to be skinny. So we're kind of programmed from a young age, all these things, from what we see on TV to now kids have access to social media, to all of these things. It kind of programs us to have a problem with food in the first place.
Absolutely. And at the same time, all the messages from the big business of food and, the food companies and the supermarkets and all they're hiring people to tweak food in a laboratory to, hit our evolutionary senses to get us eating more and more and more junk. I mean, it's a no-win situation. I have 3 kids, 17, 15, and 13 at the moment, girl, boy, girl. And a large part of what I do in my approach to this now is what it is, because I wanted to battle all of that and give them the best chance possible, and be able to wade through all this misinformation and all the billions and trillions of dollars that are put into marketing all this junk food to our kids.
I love that. And I can't tell you how many times I have a parent come to me and they're wanting to make changes with their diet and their lifestyle and stuff. Yet their kids, they're still feeding them Mountain Dew and Doritos and pizzas and all these things. And they're like, well, they're just being kids. And I'm like, well, do you want these kids that are just being kids to struggle with the health conditions you're struggling with now? Because ultimately that's what led to you being in the place that you're at currently.
It's like the kid menus at the restaurant. It should be the opposite. All that incredibly healthy food should be on the kids menu. And, we're already, 30s, 40s, 50s. And, we should, if somebody's going to have the junk, we should be giving, it should be the other way around. It kills me that we have kids menus and they are the worst possible food. And it's always the same exact Cisco food anyhow. One thing that I've learned, quite a bit trying to deal with this from as a father, again, not only trying to improve my own health and my own, my own diet, but just as importantly, trying to feed my family the most nourishing food possible, and battle all the other triggers and all the other advertising and all the other things that their friends that are, and the food at their friend's house. I'm very much a black or white person when it comes to decisions about food, and borderline orthorexic, right, where it's all or nothing, and I'm going to eat all this and none, and I'm also the same person, and I'm sure a lot of the people listening are the same way, that you're doing really well, and then you screw up with one meal or one snack, and then you thought you've thrown everything to the wind and it's all ruined. But I was very when I started to really piece together all the pieces by looking at our evolutionary past, the diets that built us as humans, the things that we can do now to eat the most nourishing food possible, I was very much focused on biological health. Like, what is the food we should be eating for optimal biological health? And I literally went through the deep end, when I started to figure out this puzzle, and forced me and my family to eat this particular way. And again, for biological health, that's great. And for most other animals, that's fine. But humans eat for a lot of different reasons. Food permeates every aspect of what we are as humans. The way we share food, the way we build traditions and cultures. And I mean, eating is a religious act. It is a political act. It is a national. It permeates every part of us being human. And we can't separate health, just biological health here, and sort of that emotional, cultural, whatever health over here. And I drove my family nuts. There was a year about 8 or 9 years ago where I said for the entire year, nobody was putting any two ingredients together that went into anybody in our family's mouths but me. Like, all of it. Like, I mean, we made the butter, we made the cheese, we made every bit of bread. Just about every bit of meat we ate was either hunted or butchered by, a complete, and it was an incredible learning opportunity for me to learn all those skills. But it was so far over the top that I think I made the damage on the other end was worse. So I now realizing that kids are kids. We're living in a modern world, and the modern world certainly has a lot of different constraints and needs, and my kids and my family have to navigate all of these things at the same time, and so do the way that we live, and so do the way that we eat. So I've relaxed on certain things, I've tightened up on other things, and I think now we've struck a really good balance with all of it.
It's funny you say all this because it all resonates with me. I've been there, done that. We've been extremely strict with our diet, or have let other things creep back in. The one thing that as parents we have to realize is we're giving our kids the proper tools for their toolbox, whether they decide to use them or not in their adult life or in their choices that they make is actually not our fault. So I kind of have to go with that. I know for us, my kids, even my 7-year-old knows how to read an ingredient label and knows how to look for sugar and knows how to do these things. And so whether or not they're choosing to eat that pizza, at least they know how to make an informed decision about what they are going to eat. So I feel like I at least get an A+ for that.
Yeah, you absolutely do. And here's the let me lay out a little bit, if it's okay for a minute, what's unique or different about my approach, and I think it's going to play a large role in where, not only where this discussion goes, but how it has impacted the way that we approach food now with my family and with our audience and everyone else. So here it is in a nutshell. When we say eating like a human, what eating like a human really means is we realize that the human digestive tract, the human body, is not designed to eat most of the foods we eat. We are biologically designed to eat a very limited, and for everyone listening, bear with me, because I know, one of the issues about food being so intricately woven in all aspects of the human fabric and the human experience is that if somebody says something that doesn't immediately resonate, it sounds like an attack, right? And everybody, just bear with me for a minute, because it's going to sound strange. It's going to sound very, very strange, but then we can kind of hopefully pull it back together. So the human body, the humans, our ancestors were designed to eat a limited amount of wild fruits, wild vegetables, and insects. I mean, that's what our ancestors, before we started creating tools and ways of processing food before we ate it, that is literally what our diets were. There may, some paleoanthropologists believe there might have been a little bit of opportunistic hunting of small animals, things like the size of a chipmunk or a squirrel. But for the most part, we're talking about a limited amount of wild fruits and vegetables and a limited amount of insects. That's what we're biologically designed to eat. So anything other than that, we have to do something to. We have to create a tool to access it. We have to create a tool to make it safe. We have to create a tool to make the nutrients in it available to us. We have to do outside of our bodies before we eat it what other animals do inside of their bodies, right? In order to access the other food. So any other food, from what I already mentioned, we as humans have to engage in some sort of technology to make it as safe and nourishing as possible for our bodies. So, okay, well, there's that over here. Then the other part of the story, which is really hard to grasp, but again, bear with me, is that even though that's what our bodies were designed to consume, in order to grow to the size that our bodies are today, and then more importantly, the size that our brains are today, we had to start including those other foods, right? So we require those other foods to be fully nourished, but we're not designed to consume them. We humans are omnivores, not by design, not by biology. We're omnivores by technology. We created the opportunities to access all those other foods and take in all sorts of incredible nutrition to build our bodies and our brains to what they are today. So things like detoxifying plants, things like fermentation, things like cooking, things like nixtamalization. Those are incredibly powerful tools that we've created to transform raw materials that we have no business eating into their safest and most nourishing forms possible for our bodies. And we started doing this, believe it or not, almost 3.5 million years ago, and we created our first stone tool and used that tool to start scavenging dead animals on the African savanna that another animal had killed. Later on, we created things like hunting technology and fire to cook with, and then things like fermentation, and the list goes on. But the majority of the time period of our evolutionary past and our dietary past has been focused on our ancestors creating technologies to do exactly that, make food safe and nourishing as possible. And that's what food processing has been for millions of years. Today, it's the exact opposite. Food processing today is a dirty word. Food processing today is an evil thing. Food processing does the opposite. Instead of making food safe and nourishing and bioavailable, it makes food unsafe, and it strips away the nourishing aspects of food purely for the reasons of other people making a lot of money and increasing shelf life and uniformity and all those other sorts of things. So the reason that this is such a long, drawn out part of this is because when you realize that, it's about the how, not the what. It's not necessarily the food, it's how that food has been prepared that makes all the difference. Almost every single, literally, I bet you it's 99.9% of all dietary discussions today are focused on what you should eat. Say, what should I eat? Somebody says, okay, a half a cup of spinach and 3 chickpeas, and that's the kind of answers that we get. The more valid, the more important answers are, you should be eating this food that's been prepared this way. Like, so for example, 3 years ago, I was on sabbatical. My family and I literally traveled the world, and we were living and working with indigenous groups all over the world. looking at preparing food and documenting. And in almost every place that we went, I had some sort of a lecture or presentation that I gave to an audience. And I don't care where we were in the world. It could have been Africa or Asia. I don't care where we were. I always got the same questions at the end. And everybody wants to know if we should be eating bread. Everybody wants to know if human adults should be drinking dairy. And these are the kind of questions that everybody wants to know. And when you ask the question, if the question is framed, should humans eat bread? Then there's no answer to that, because Wonder Bread, packaged Wonder Bread is called bread, and a long fermented sourdough loaf of bread is also called bread, and they are two completely different foods. Same thing with different types of cheeses. The same thing with literally almost everything in our diets today. So if we ask, because I made me think of it because you said pizza. Pizza in my mind, can be an incredibly healthy food, like a sourdough crust. Real fermented cheese and wonderful meats and things like that. That's heaven. I mean, that's amazing. Or it could be complete junk food, but we call it the same thing. And we have huge discussions about whether or not we should be eating pizza without breaking those sorts of things down. So if you are thinking about dietary choices in your house, and one of the first things I would suggest is taking back control of your food and learning to cook those foods entirely from scratch. And when you do that, it's one of the most powerful and educational things that you could possibly do, because it's there, the magic in the kitchen, where, again, these foods we shouldn't be eating anyhow unless they've been prepared properly. And that preparation happens in the kitchen. It's not happening at Domino's Pizza. It's happening, certainly in your own kitchen.
I love that. And, a lot of people say they don't have time to do that, but it can be so dang basic, preparing your own steak. I mean,
Sure.
Go down and buy it from the farmer down the road and cook that thing up on the barbecue. It is not that hard to do. And I think sometimes as a society, we overcomplicate things, and we think that we just put too much thought into how it gets there instead of just doing it and experimenting with it. And so, I love that you say that. I think everybody should go through a time where they start understanding where these things are coming from and how they're prepared.
Sure. And there's several hurdles, I think. The hurdle that you mentioned, because this is my takeaway message. Everybody says, what do we do? At the end of a podcast or end of a presentation is, okay, what do we do? What's our first step? And my answer is always the same anymore. It's take the food that you eat every single day, and I don't care if it's the most basic food or the most complicated, and learn to make that food 100% from scratch. And several things happen. One is, if you want to make a change in your diet, you should be changing the things that you eat every day, several times a week, several times a month. Those are, changing the Sunday meal that you feed your family isn't going to do anything. I mean, it might feel good and it might be cool for an Instagram photo, but you're not changing the diet and health of your family by changing a once a week meal. You're changing the health and diet of your family by replacing the bread that they eat every day for sandwiches with the best possible version, right? Or taking the junk American cheese and actually giving them real cheese, or that's how you make a significant change. But if you take if you eat, I don't care what it is, French toast in the morning or pizza 3 times a week, or even if it's whatever it is, take that and make it 100% from scratch. Learn to do that. Even if you screw it up, you will know more about that food than you could ever learn from a book. You're definitely ever going to learn from any kind of advertising or commercial stuff that's been done on that food. And then even if you've messed it up and nobody will eat it and you're going to buy it for the rest of your life again, at least you know what to buy and who to support with your money and to bring in the best food. But so there's that part. The other part of it is the time thing. Everybody's, it takes way too much time to cook. Well, in the beginning, it does. If you're not somebody who cooks regularly and understands a lot of the way different ratios and different things work in the kitchen, then yeah, there's going to be a little bit of a learning curve. But once you get over that learning curve, you can cook just about anything, because the same sorts of rules and ratios and things apply across the board. But even with all that, even though people say it's a time thing, and some people might say it's an economic thing as well, the real I think barrier for a lot of people, whether they realize it or want to admit it or not, is fear of either messing it up or an unfounded but understandable fear of making somebody sick. Oh my gosh, what if I do something wrong? What if, especially when we start talking about things like fermentation and the like. And what I can tell you is the amount of resources that are out there now. A lot of it's junk, but a lot of it's amazing, free and paid, information and classes and all that on the internet and at your fingertips. You can learn to make just about anything without leaving your house, and you have much more information than your ancestors did, who, by the way, were doing this stuff in caves with sticks and rocks. And your kitchens are a lot more well equipped than them. But for some reason, we've been duped into thinking that the USDA and the FDA and all these food manufacturers are out there for our health, and we should be turning to them for our answers. And we should, of course, be going to them for our food because they know how to make it. And that's the safe way. And it's the exact opposite. What you can do in your kitchen can produce not only the most delicious, but the safest and most nourishing food possible. And by buying local from local farmers, people that know your name, your kids' names, and you know them and the family, that's the safest food system possible. And you can be a part of it. And literally it starts with learning to make kefir on your countertop, or learning to make sourdough bread, or learning to butcher even a chicken. That's the first step into the safest and most rewarding and ethical and sustainable food system possible.
Boy, I love that. And I can tell you I've been in all those places. We ferment food at my house. We hunt. We have our own little farm going on. My kids play barefoot out in the chicken coop. They get all their healthy bacteria from the chicken coop, I'm pretty sure. And
I bet you they do.
I'm pretty sure that I had a cooking class here the other day, and I saw some worry in somebody's face when I grabbed the eggs that were right out of the chicken coop and I started cracking them into a bowl. There was a real sense of concern on somebody's face over that, and I was thinking, this is the bleached white thing that you're getting at the store is so far removed from what you're getting that just came from my farm and my little birdies that are running around eating bugs and mice and whatever else they can catch. And so, I was kind of amazed that somebody was afraid of that. And I don't think of that because that's just how I've existed my whole life. I grew up on a farm, but there's a lot of fear of things that are real. I mean, including like we butcher our own meat, and some people are afraid of that.
Yeah, it's I went the other day. So everybody in my family just about is a licensed to hunt, but it's mostly me and my son that do most of the hunting. And it's goose season right now on the Eastern Shore of Maryland. And I am a huge advocate of complete nose to tail. If something's going to die, not only for nutritional reasons, but for ethical and sustainability reasons, you should be eating the entire animal. And that's the way our ancestors have approached it for 2 million years. And here on the Eastern Shore, unfortunately, there's a lot of goose hunting, but unfortunately, most of the hunters today that hunt geese breast them out. They'll open the front up, pull the breasts out, and literally throw the rest of the bird away. And I mean, they're throwing away some of the best tasting fat on the planet. They're throwing away the legs. They're throwing away the livers. I mean, goose livers, Jesus, are amazing. Goose hearts, goose gizzards, all of it, right? The skin, it all just gets tossed because breasting it is super easy, and plucking it, it takes more time. And especially now, this year and last year, it's a big deal. It's becoming even more common because, when we do the geese, we'll do a wax dip and then pull off the feathers in a wax dip, and it takes a while to get the equipment set up. So by the time if we went out, and it used to be 2 birds limit per day, so Bill and I go out, we come back with 4 birds. It's worth setting it all up. But right now, it's 1 bird limit per day. So if you're a hunter by yourself, you come back with a goose. Is it worth? Most people, so they're just going to breast them out and throw it away. Well, we do all of our own processing and butchering at home as well. But the other day, we were on a time crunch. We were out much later than usual, and we had something to do in the afternoon. So we went down to the butcher shop around the corner. They do processing. They do deer and geese and ducks. And again, people go there. It's $6. I'm sorry, it's $5. If you can give them a goose, pay them $5. They will pluck it. They will pull all the organs out. They will wrap it in plastic. They'll give you back the bird that looks like you went to the store and bought a chicken. $5. And anything else you want. Give your liver, whatever else, go back. Or $3, they'll give you the breast back, and that's it. And it's a federal migratory bird, so they're not allowed to sell the rest of it. And they actually, most people still get them breasted because of that $2. They still get them breasted, and the rest of the bird literally goes thrown in the trash. But anyhow, I'm bringing this up. So the other day, we were on a time crunch. We each got a bird. We had 2 geese, and we didn't have time that day. So we went over to the processing shop, and we walked in there. And they said, "What do you want?" And I said, "Can you please just pluck these birds? Give me back the liver and the gizzards and the hearts." And I said, "Oh, and the feet." And they looked at me and I said, "What do you want the feet for? Nobody gets the feet." And I mean, these guys process hundreds of birds a day, thousands of birds a year. And they've been in business 15, 20 years. And they said, nobody has ever asked for the feet, ever. They said, "What are you going to do with the feet?" And I said, "Well, I put it in the bone broth." "What do you mean bone broth?" I said, "Well, like the soup, the stew, the stock. When I make the stock, I put the feet in." "Well, why do you do that?" And I explained it. And she looked at me, the woman that did it. She goes, "There is no way I would ever eat that." She goes, and then I said, at the health food store in town, if you go into the freezer where the chickens are, they actually have bags of chicken feet. And she said, And this is exactly what she said. And I promise this is coming back around to where we started. She said, "I go to the store." This is the woman that processes wild animals for a living. She goes, "I go to the store to buy my chicken stock or chicken broth from a box so that I know where it comes from." That's exactly the words that she said. I mean, and again, people listening, but really, for some reason, there's a huge industry, a huge processing line, people that none of us have ever met nor ever will, involved with raising those chickens, processing those chickens, making that bone broth, putting it in a box, delivering it to the store, putting it on the shelf. We might know the person that checks us out at the register, but that's the only part of the system we're a part of. And in some people's minds, that's where safety comes from, and that's where knowledge of where food comes from. And the idea of, making stock from a goose and keeping the feet is so incredibly foreign. But that's what we're dealing with. And so the larger message is, what we can do in our kitchens is absolutely incredible. I know I'm not telling you anything at all, but it blows my mind. I'll never forget that. That was like 2 weeks ago.
Well, I've heard similar things from people, and I'm always just like, well, I mean, you've got to come try my bone broth that's thick, and like, you can tell there's something, like, there's a reason. I tell people this all the time. There's a reason that chicken soup kind of got that heal you thing for when you're sick, but it's not from the Campbell's soup that came, in the can. It's from that stuff from back in the day where they used to make it out of all of the leftover pieces and parts of what all of the other meals that they made. And I mean, I'll even take it one step further. I don't know what your practices are, but when we're done making bone broth at our house, I feed the leftovers to my chickens. Like, they love it.
Do you?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
All right, I got to start that.
No, I'm not even kidding you. You know how the bones just start to fall apart and stuff when you cook them down. My chickens go crazy for that stuff. They love it, and they can get into all of those parts and stuff that you can't eat, and they love it. They think it's the best thing in the planet. And when I come out with that soup pot after I have all the little bits and pieces left there, they come running. They're like, "It's Christmas."
Oh, that's awesome. No, we got to start doing that. We have we only have 5 chickens. We just started this year with chickens, so.
Oh, well, I'm telling you, they're going to love it. And it's the same thing with when we're processing our wild game. Boy, we process it out in our driveway. All the people driving by can see we have a big dead animal there. And we have all these chickens that are gathered around the tables that we're because they're like, "Yeah, throw me some of that." So we have
Right.
Our chickens are not just free range. They're like meat fed, possibly, I guess. But in nature, chickens are actually a meat eater. They like to eat lots of bugs and things like that. They don't go looking for corn in nature.
No, not at all. And I bet your eggs are a lot better for it as well.
Oh, there's a huge difference there for sure. So let's kind of start diving into primal eating a little bit, though, because there's so many different takes on what eating primal looks like and how you should do it. And so I'm sure you have your 2 cents worth, and I would love to hear your theories around what we as humans should be eating and why.
That's a good question. I'll give you my take for sure. I'm sorry, my phone went off and I'm very embarrassed. I'm going to have to turn this off. It's a great question. And I think a one-word answer to begin is diversity, right? Like I mentioned earlier, humans are omnivores, and we have been for 3.5 million years. But again, because we're culturally are incredibly adaptable, right? And what humans, our ancestors first stood up about 5 to 7 million years ago in Africa. And a lot of evolution took place in Africa until about 2 million years ago. So millions and millions and millions of years in just one place, or one continent. And then eventually, about beginning 2 million years ago, or just this side of 2 million years, our ancestors started spreading out, and ended up populating Asia, parts of Europe, and then that continued to spread. Obviously, we're all over the world today. And you can imagine over that entire time, we found ourselves in a lot of different places with different resources, different plants, different animals, different things, different climates. And we managed to figure it out. And we managed to figure it out, again, not because biologically we could, but we could figure out what to do with tools and technologies to extract the most amount of nutrition in the safest and most bioavailable way, no matter where we found ourselves. And that was like the hunter-gatherer approach. So when I think about a primal diet, my first reaction is not, are we going to go do carnivore? Are we going to do keto? Are we going to do whatever? Although we can get into some of that stuff in just a minute. My first reaction, my first thought is, well, I need to act as a modern day human inhabiting a hunter-gatherer body, with hunter-gatherer nutritional requirements. I need to enter into any eating situation I find myself in the same mindset that I believe they found themselves in. So if I'm at the dining hall at the college, or if I'm in a restaurant, or if I'm in my kitchen, or if I'm in the middle of the woods, my mindset is the same as what I think somebody 40,000 years ago in the middle of the ice age on a mountain in Europe, or during the Pliocene in Africa on the savannah. It's the same thing. Look around, and I'm confident they somehow thought to themselves and said, okay, how do I get the most amount of nutrition into my body in the most accessible way possible without doing any work at all? I mean, our modern approach is really screwed up. I'm going to divert for a second, but I promise it'll bring it right back. The modern approach to eating is, we all want to be thin. We all want to be thin, and we want to eat all day long. Right? It's such a social thing to eat. We go to a bar, we eat. We sit down, we watch a football game, we eat. We're together and we gather, we eat. So believe it or not, we seek out nutrient-free food. Right? We literally, modern people, especially in the Western part of the world, seek out food that is free of nutrition. Now, we think about it, but if you look at the American grocery stores, especially, and there's a study done about 7 years ago, they went to a bunch of American grocery stores and looked at the labeling of food. And it was something like, I forget, 85% of the food labels boasted what the food didn't have in it. Not what it had, but it boasted about what it didn't have. Fat-free, calorie-free, gluten-free, whatever free. And again, some of these things we might not want to have in our diets. It's not the point. But the point is, our modern mindset, when we go about making a decision about how to eat, is, how do I eat all day long without getting fat? And therefore, we're seeking nutrient-free foods. And then on top of it, we go to a gym. And I'm not saying exercise is bad at all, but I'm just thinking about the mindset. It's, let's eat all day long, all this food that has nothing in it, so I don't get fat. And then I'll go and drive to a gym and pay a lot of money and then work out really hard to burn more calories. And then, to me, I feel like I have a fit lifestyle. Well, all of that is the exact opposite of what people were doing in the past. In the past, people sought out nutrient-dense food and created technologies to make sure as much of that nutrition came into their mouths in a form that their body could do something with it. And they wanted to get that food by exerting the least amount of energy possible. Now, they were certainly living incredibly different lifestyles where they were moving, a lot more than us. So I'm not suggesting that exercise is bad. In fact, I'm an athlete and I love exercise, and it's all very, very important. But my point here is that our mindset is the exact opposite of what it has been. And by shifting that mindset, we can begin to think like people did in the past when we were eating incredibly nourishing diet. So back to that situation, when you find yourself in a dining hall or a restaurant or an office party or your own kitchen, no matter, and this, what I'm going to say here alleviates a lot of stressors, I think, and a lot of guilt. Whatever situation you find yourself in, no matter where you are, just like our ancestors, all you need to do is make the best decisions possible in that given moment. And if you make the best decisions possible in that given moment, you should walk out of there feeling like you've done this incredibly heroic feat. Even if you didn't eat the best thing, the best of that situation is a really wonderful thing to have done. And to me, again, from my perspective of the processing is so incredibly important. I look at the food choices around me and I say, okay, here's my choices of food. I know how these foods have been made, and I'm going to pick the foods that when I put them into my mouth, they can deliver the most incredible nutrition to my body as possible. So, and if that's the approach, we break down all these barriers, we break down all these categories, like we mentioned earlier. Bread is no longer just bread. My family does eat bread. Disclaimer. We don't eat a lot of it, but the bread that we eat is exclusively sourdough bread. And we can talk a little bit about why it's important, but it's exclusively sourdough. So when we're out, we very rarely are eating bread if we're at a restaurant or in a dining hall or something, because I know that none of that bread has been made to the standards that I would. Same thing with fermentation and other sorts of things. So that's my mindset approach in any situation is, how do I get the most amount of high quality nutrition in the safest way possible into my body so my body can do something with it? And I know that's a sort of really vague answer. Now, within that, I do think that we eat a very high fat diet. Believe it or not, when we start seeing technologies first appear about 3.5 million years ago, two things are happening with that technology. And we know this from the archaeological record. The tools that our ancestors were creating were used for scavenging meat and marrow from kills from other animals. So because that's all they had access to. When a predator kills another animal on the savannah, the first thing that the predator eats is the blood, the fat, and the organs, and then sometimes leaves the meat behind. So our ancestors had access to this sort of rotting flesh and the marrow inside of the bones. And we see on these archaeological sites not only the butchering marks on the bones from the stone tools, but also the long bones that are broken intentionally with a rock to access the marrow on the inside. So with that, our ancestors for 3.5 million years have included meat and animal fat in their diets. And then when we started hunting, we had 2 million years ago, we had first access to the organ meats, we had first access to the visceral fat, we had first access to the blood, over the other animals, because we actually killed them. So we've had high quality saturated animal fat in our diets for 3.5 million years. And in fact, there are some anthropologists like Nikki Vendor who believe that it was actually fat that built us as a species. It was the incredible nutrition that comes with fat that allowed our bodies to grow, and more importantly, our brains to grow. So in our house, if we do eat a large amount of high quality animal fat, and if we're cooking with fat, it is always animal fat. We do use some polyunsaturated vegetable oils, fruit oils, olive oil and avocado oil, right, which are both fruit oils. And the only nut oil we use is coconut. And again, all three of those are almost exclusively in cold applications like mayonnaises and dressings and sauces. But there is no industrial nut or seed oils in our house other than coconut oil. So the primal approach in my mind, high quality fat plays a very large role in it. High quality protein plays a very large role in it. And if you look at the ethnographic record and the way hunter-gatherers that have been documented over the past several hundred years operate, and you also look at the archaeological record, animals, the way we eat animals today is nothing like the way we eat animals in the past, right? Animals, first of all, we're talking about, in most cases, groups of people who included dozens of different animals in their diet on a yearly basis. Dozens. And when they ate those animals, they started on one end and go through the other end and then go kill another animal. And if you think about it today, one of the issues I have with some of the approaches to what some would consider a primal diet, so I'm going to eat meat, and then they go eat the same cut from the same animal 5 nights a week. They always get a T-bone steak, or they always get chicken breast, or they always get whatever. And there's nothing about that is representative of the way we ate in the past. I mean, that is in my mind, not the most nourishing way to go about it, and certainly not the most ethical way to go about it. By going to the store and buying the same chicken breast every day for your family, and that's the only thing that you buy, to me, your buying actions are supporting the same kind of, or almost doing the same thing as the people who are killing the geese and only taking the breast and throwing the rest away. I mean, that's so from an ethical perspective and a sustainability perspective. From a nutritional perspective, you're missing a much larger picture. If first of all, you're only eating meat and not the fat and the organs, and it's certainly there's all those other issues. But the vegetable part, from a primal approach, I think is where there's a lot of controversy today, because I don't think anybody who is looking at a primal approach to eating would argue that high quality animal fat and meat are hugely important. I think the big debate is really with plants. And here's the issue with plants. Plants, well, a couple things. One is our ancestors, and there is no doubt in my mind, our ancestors were eating plants. They were, period. They were eating plants. They were eating what we call underground storage organs, which are roots, corms, and tubers, and those sorts of things. They were eating, not large amounts probably, but they were eating wild grains, and later were eating domesticated grains. So these foods were in their diets. But when I say that, that doesn't mean what they had access to and the way they ate those foods is anything like what you find in the produce section of a grocery store. Right. And one way, this is the way I used to think about it. When I walked into a produce section of the grocery store. This is years ago, but bear with me for a minute, because I'm sure some people listening may feel the same way. I'd walk in there with my cart and I'd have this mindset, listening to the media, okay, I'm in the produce section. I'm looking around at all, there's mist in the water, and I see green and all the other colors. And I'm like, look, this is where I need to be if I want to be healthy. This is where all the nutrition is. And some of it's good, more is better. And then in that section of the grocery store, I would shut my brain off and not think and just load the cart. Like, oh, so it must be really, 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 really good for me. So let's just load the cart. And that is the opposite of how you should be thinking about it. It's not to say you shouldn't eat vegetables, but here's the important thing about vegetables. I have a book coming out in March called Eat Like a Human, and there's a chapter on plants. And the very first sentence says, it starts off the chapter as, plants should scare the hell out of you. And then it goes on from it. But I wholeheartedly believe this. That isn't to say you shouldn't eat plants, but you have to understand what plants are doing on this planet to understand how to eat them. So every organism on this planet is here to survive and reproduce viable offspring. That's all that, and if that fails, then the species becomes extinct. So animals protect themselves in a lot of different ways, but plants don't move. So some plants certainly have things like thorns and tough bark on trees and things to protect them, but for the most part, plants protect themselves not with physical defenses, but with chemical defenses. Every single plant on this planet has some level of a toxin in it. Now, some of these toxins are so benign, they won't hurt you. Some of them, believe it or not, add valuable medicinal and flavor qualities to the food that we enjoy at different low levels. And some of these toxins will harm you over a long period, and some of them will kill you outright. But they're there. We need to understand that all plants have these toxins in them, and even the ones we consider healthy. And if we're going to eat them, we have to eat them the way that we've been approaching plants for millions of years. And we can take really good lessons from our ancestors here as well. We need to make sure that our approach is as safe as possible. And here's a couple examples of really amazing approaches. And some of them are incredibly simple. Number one, eating seasonally solves a lot of issues right away. We have, at the beginning of Food Inc., the narrator, the documentary, the narrator says something like, "We don't have any seasons in our American grocery stores anymore." And it's true, we don't. We don't have any seasons in our grocery store. We can get spinach, we can get blueberries, we can get whatever all year round. And we think that's a wonderful, advantage, not all of us, but many people think it's a wonderful advantage of the modern food system to be able to ship in avocados from wherever any time of the year. But what we don't understand is, some of these plants, even though they can deliver good nutrition to us, deliver some nasty stuff to us as well. And when we ate them seasonally, they would build up for the couple weeks they were available, and then not having them in our diet for the rest of the year allowed our body to get rid of them, and then we'd start that whole process over again. But we've created an incredibly dangerous situation by providing access to the same plant every single day of the year. And then on top of that, the plant producers the companies are marketing these plants as incredible health foods and making us think, hey, we should eat that plant every day and we're going to be super healthy. And these superfoods, spinach is an incredible example. And I'll talk more about it in just a second, but spinach is full of oxalates. If you're eating a spinach or kale shake every day right now, stop. You are literally hurting yourself. So number one, eating seasonally can help. Number two, we engage in some of the detoxification strategies. And the most basic and easiest and powerful one is fermentation. Fermentation is home, and I know I'm not telling you anything, but home lactic fermentation of vegetables, making things like sauerkraut and kimchi and the like, is not only incredibly easy and simple, but in the words of Sandor Katz, he has looked, fermentation guru, he has looked all over the world and has never found one example of somebody being hospitalized ever in the planet from a lacto-fermented vegetable that's been done at home or anything. I mean, it's incredibly safe. And it's a great kind of gateway drug to the whole world of food processing. But so fermentation can help detoxify a lot of the issues that some of these plants have. So, and then finally, and there's a lot of other things that we can do, but eating seasonally, eating a variety of, not eating the same plant all the time. When at the dining hall here at the college, when we were more open than we are now because of COVID, but we have a really good salad bar. For a college salad bar, we have a great salad bar. I have my students come in and we talk about what a healthy lifestyle, healthy living, healthy eating, and all this. And they're like, yeah, I eat a salad every day. And I eat all the vegetables in the salad bar. Like, that's awesome. That means you're eating the same 10 vegetables every day for 365 days. And when you compare that to the way our ancestors were eating, they were eating hundreds of different plants throughout the year and not the same, green peppers and, carrots and all this. So eating a variety of different foods is incredibly important as well. Cooking them when they need to be. And there's a lot of different strategies for detoxifying them, but plant toxins are something that we need to be very aware of. Oh, and finally, the last piece is we need to understand, when I say our digestive tracts are designed to eat, and I said intentionally, a limited amount of wild fruits and vegetables and insects. I mean, the two most important words there are limited and wild. So we need to understand a limited part I went over, but the wild part is incredibly important. That doesn't mean we should go grab huge things of bananas and just eat bananas every day, because a modern banana compared to its own wild ancestor is more like a candy bar than it is a fruit. Almost every fruit that we have available today looks nothing like its wild version and has been bred to be sweeter and be larger and be full of water. And it, believe it or not, has been bred. It has less nutrition in most cases. So fruit, in my mind, fruit should be considered a treat. Fruit should be considered a dessert, because that's really what it is. So we should be a little bit scared of the vegetable. We should be respectful of the vegetables and understand that the processing and approach to eating them is more important in some cases than the actual thing itself. And fruit, we need to acknowledge that fruit today is not the same fruit available millions of years ago, and we should think of it as a sweet treat and not a a staple part of our diet. So I'll give you one quick example with oranges. So 3 years ago, my family and I, we were in Kenya, and we were in West Pokot. We were working with an indigenous group there that makes a fermented ash yogurt. It's a wonderful food. And on our way there, we stopped at this other spot. Anyhow, our truck got stuck in the mud, our vehicle, and we got out and we're pushing it. And as we were pushing it, one of the women that was with us is an incredible botanist. She's amazing and can identify everything. And she looks up and she goes, "Those are wild oranges." And I've been foraging for like 35 years, and I've never been in a wild orange. So I looked up and oh, wild orange, and I'm looking, and she's pointing, and we're trying to push the truck, and there's mud flying up, and wild orange, and I can't see it. I'm like, where? And we finally got the truck unstuck, and she pulls me over, and she reaches up and pulls this thing down that's the size of a blueberry. It looked like an orange that had been put through like a laser thing and shrunk down like in a movie. And I'm like, oh my God, that's a wild orange. And it looked just like an orange, but it was minuscule, smaller than a marble. And she goes, "Eat it." And I ate it. And I will tell you, this was 3 years ago. I can still taste it. I mean, I can still taste this thing. It was not sweet at all. It was incredibly bitter. And the flavor, it was like an orange on steroids as far as flavors, like all the things that make an orange. It had immense amounts, but it wasn't sweet. It was incredibly bitter. That's the kind of thing we're talking about. And now an orange today is just full of sugar and is 100. I don't know how many times larger, but a lot larger. Those are the kind of differences that we can imagine. So you need to think. To answer your question more succinctly, I think a primal approach to me is thinking like a hunter-gatherer in terms of, okay, here's my resource base. What can I do to take those resources and make them as nourishing as possible? Focus on high-quality animal fats. Focus on and organs. Focus on animal meats, a variety of them. And when it comes to plants, we include plants in our diets, but we make sure that we think about fruit as a treat and vegetables as something to respect and detoxify and do things to make the nutrients available.
I love all that. I can't even tell you how much I love everything that you're saying here. It's so great. So, I gotta say, I'm pretty jealous of you traveling around and learning from all of these people. In this journey of yours, what was the most incredible amount of time period you spent with somebody, and who did you think you learned the most from?
Wow. It's hard to say the most because everybody's, the constant, no matter where we were, was that humans are just amazing. When you get away from the political nonsense and, people trying to make a lot of money and company and big business, all that stuff, when you get rid of all that, and I don't care where we were, and we've literally been all over the world. When you get into where real people are, they're just amazing. And they all have something to share. And the other constant too is the less they have, the more they're willing to share. Like we were in Oaxaca a couple of years ago, in the mountains of Oaxaca, Mexico, in a little tiny village called San Antonio de la Cal. And we were there to learn about a traditional maize processing, a process called nixtamalization, which maize is one of the most difficult grains for the human body to access all the nutrients from on their own. So there's an ancient process that used to be done with taking the maize and simmering it in wood ash, but now it's done with calcium hydroxide or cal or a couple of different things. It's not done that often. It should be. But anyhow, this village was built on a mountain of calcium hydroxide. So most of the calcium hydroxide is mined right from this mountain to go get spread out throughout Central and South America to do this process. So we figured, hey, this is the village where we're going to learn the most from. And we got hooked up with this family, and it was the poorest. I don't want it to sound anything poor, financially poorest. It was rich in every other way, but as far as money was concerned, these people had the least amount of money than any other family we spent time with. And it was a little shack on the side of the mountain, rusting metal. And we go in, But I'm telling you, even though the floors were dirt, they were swept. And I know that sounds weird, but the floors were swept, spotless. They had literally just got running water the month before. It was just this one hose spigot. And we go in there, and they only have enough money to eat meat, I think, twice a month. And when I say meat, it was like a knuckle of something. It was mostly bone with some gristle and a little bit of meat hanging off it. And they made sure, they knew we were coming. They made sure this was the day they did it, and they shared it with us. And we literally ate on their bed because it was one room. Anyhow, the other thing I remember, which is fascinating, and I don't want to be off topic, but we go into this place with my preconceived modern, notions of cleanliness and housing, all these things, and cooking. And I go in, and we're there, dirt floors, a hose spigot, and we're about to get started. And this wonderful woman, her name was Juana, is there to help me out. And we're starting to get the maize, and we're going to do this and that. And I went to grab something. And I don't know if you ever saw NCIS, the TV show NCIS, but Gibbs would smack people in the back of their heads. She smacked me in the back of she knew me for 15 minutes. She smacked me in the back of my head. My head flew forward, and I looked at her. And she actually, her native language was not Spanish. It was something else. And her Spanish was really broken. And my Spanish is like really broken. And she ends up, we figure out, she told me I had to wash my hands. Like, don't start until you wash your hands. And I was like, are you kidding me? Wash my hands. But their standards were incredibly high, even where they were. But to make it, they gave us everything that they had. They shared knowledge, they shared food, they shared stories. It was amazing. But I will say, as far as people are concerned, that I learned the most from, I spent 5 weeks in Mongolia when we were filming The Great Human Race for National Geographic. And we were in central Mongolia for half of it, northern Mongolia for the other half. And I will tell you, it may be my favorite place in the world. It was desolate and beautiful, but as far as the resources that the people that lived out on the Mongolian steppe had, it was the least amount of natural resources they had access to, but it made them do the most with those resources. And I remember we had to get on. We went to one of the nomads out there that had some camels. We were probably 4 hours from the nearest town, and they had camels and horses, and we were going to take off and ride. One of the things we had to do is ride on one of these horses. And I looked at the horse, and I don't know much about horses. I never grew up with any. I've been to like a dude ranch a couple of times, but I know nothing about horses. And I looked at the horse, and he's like, go ahead. And there's no saddle. There's no, I guess, bridle, nothing. And he's like, go ride. Let's go ride what? And then finally I find out I'm not getting a saddle. But we did talk to him about putting something, I guess it's a bridle. I don't know. And again, we have a translator, and he says, well, I don't have one of those. I can make you one. I'm like, oh my gosh, how long are we going to be here for? And I remember he gave his wife some orders, and his wife takes off and comes back with this sack. I mean, it was a bag the size of a 55-gallon drum, and she's dragging it, and she sits it between them. And this husband and wife, and they couldn't be more than 4 feet tall, either of them, smiles ear to ear, and they were looking at each other, and it was full of camel hair, this sack, and she's pulling out the camel hair, and she's twisting it in her hands as she's feeding it to him. So she's kind of making it into a cord as she feeds it to him, and he is finishing the cordage making and at the same time making the bridle. I mean, it looked like a magic show. 10 minutes later, he has a full bridle with a horn. I don't know what it's all called, but it fit all the way in the mouth, around the head, and intricate, with a huge thing that came off the back that and they stuck it on the horse. It fit perfectly, and off we rode. It was amazing. But this was it's a magical experience there. So that's the sort of thing that I experienced over and over again with people in Mongolia. But this one particular story, I think, is kind of the gem of what you can of the experience. So when we landed in Ulaanbaatar, which is the capital of Mongolia, actually half the population of Mongolia lives in Ulaanbaatar, and the other half is spread throughout the country. We went to a really nice restaurant, amazing restaurant, the first night, and we sit down, and we didn't know what to order, and I saw horse organ platter. on the menu. I'm like, oh, yeah, of course. So we ordered the horse organ platter, and then this was on National Geographic's budget, so we were ordering the most expensive things on there. So the horse organ platter, and then the next most expensive thing was just a meat dish. So the two most expensive things on the menu. And then a little while later, they come out. And the difference between these two platters is the great setup for the story. So they put these two platters down, and the horse organ platter looked like it came out of a 5-star Michelin restaurant. I mean, every organ was there. It was beautifully plated. You could see each. It was gorgeous. The other equally expensive dish, which was the meat dish, was a pile of fist-sized chunks of each one of them was meat, bone, and fat and gristle. Each one of them. I didn't know what animal it came from, and I didn't even know what part of the animal it came from. They all were just fist-sized chunks of meat, bone, gristle, and fat, and it was gray. So you had this incredibly gorgeous plated dish of organs, and this like steaming pile of gray gristle and bone and fat. So that was the first night. Well, weeks and weeks and weeks later, we end up in northern Mongolia, and we're at this guy's garo yurt. It was him and his wife and his son, and he was a yak herder. And we were there. He was going to butcher a yak, and two of his neighbors came, and they came from like 30 miles away on horseback because that was his nearest neighbors. And it was 55 below. It was so cold. And they take this yak out, this massive animal, and the head guy, he grabs a huge sledgehammer and hits this yak over the head. In one strike, I've never seen anything this massive just drop to its knees. And they turned him over. They turned the yak over, and a yak has a really rounded back. So they put two logs on either side of its back. So you can imagine this yak's on its back, legs in the air. They cut its throat right away and collect all the blood, obviously, because they were gonna eat that. And then what happened next? I love learning how other cultures butcher animals. It's such a great window into what they think is important, what parts of the animals they eat, all sorts of things. And I love watching it. So what happened next, I've never seen in my life. They took the three guys, had knives, and they carefully open up the skin, but they do it like an autopsy. Like you hunt. Most of us would make a cut up to the bottom of the rib cage, pull the organs. Well, they didn't do that. They actually opened it up like an autopsy, and then they cut the rib cage out like a shield. And again, it looked like an autopsy, and they pulled the whole rib cage off. So now we're looking at this yak laying on its back, legs in the air, and all of the organs are exposed in one. You can see everything. And they took a tarp and put it up under where the bottom legs were by the butt, and laid it there. They cut the trachea. By the trachea, they pulled everything out in one, very, very carefully. I mean, these guys were like surgeons. They pulled the entire thing out in one piece onto this tarp. The wife comes out, ear to ear smile. She's so happy. She grabs the gallbladder and spleen. They don't eat. It's the only part of the animal they don't eat. They feed it to the dogs. But then she took the stomach and the intestines, and then she went over to her spot outside. And I didn't notice it until then. Again, it was so cold. There was a pile of something. It turns out it was the contents of the stomach and the intestines. So she cleans the stomach and the intestines, and it just freezes and gets bigger every time they kill a yak, because they use the intestines like we do to stuff it with meat and make a sausage-like thing, and they fill the stomachs with fermented yak cream to make a fermented yak butter. So she was very happy to do that. And they took all the organs out and carefully separated them, and because they were going to eat every single one of them, obviously. And then, only after they got all the organs out, they literally dropped their knives and picked up saws and axes. And they took the rest of the animal apart. It looked like a Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So for what looked like surgeons until they got the organs out, it turned to like mayhem afterwards. And they created exactly what we saw in that restaurant. They cared so much about the organs, and that part of the blood and the organs and the fat. They cared so much about that, but the rest of it was all the same to them. They didn't. I mean, they ate it. Don't get me wrong, but it wasn't. We're the exact opposite. We care about the loin and this and this and this and this, and we think the opposite way about it. Fascinating to me. But seriously, that time in Mongolia was probably the most. I don't know. I don't want to say incredible because everybody's been so amazing, but that was the most educational, I think.
That's so amazing. I definitely want to get out and do some more traveling and experience some of these things because it's just incredible. And I myself have only experienced my own life hunting experiences. I've never gone anywhere else or done any of that. So that's pretty great. Now, what do your kids think of this kind of stuff? Do they feel like I know my kids, they love these experiences. Like my daughter can't, at 7 years old, cannot wait for us to bring an animal home so she can help chop it up. It's like her favorite thing. And I know that
Really?
might, oh yeah. And I know that might sound gruesome, but she is the biggest animal lover in the planet. I mean, last night she was carrying around a chicken like a little baby and rocking it and stuff. But she also has this innate ability to understand, that it's also going to feed us or it's going to do,
Yeah.
do all these things. And she knows how to separate the two things. And it's really kind of incredible how she articulates it. And it makes me thankful that we've exposed her to these kind of things. Because I feel like she understands where things come from the very bottom up. It's not just something in a styrofoam package at a store to her. And I feel like that's really valuable, like you said, in how you treat your food and also teaching your kids the value of it and not wasting some of these resources. So I guess what's your take on that?
Well, first off, congratulations because you must be doing something right. If that's what you've created there is so hard to do in today's world. I mean, when you have Disney and Bambi and everything else running, it's so hard to, like I said earlier, I have three kids. My oldest daughter is 17, my son is 15, and my youngest daughter is 13, and they are completely different kids as from one another, as they should be. My oldest daughter, Brianna, will, as far as what they think, she will try anything, no matter what her gut, literally her gut, I mean, her stomach tells her, she will try anything because she wants to experience it. Intellectually, she just wants to experience it. So when we were traveling, she was very adventurous for these things. Now, my son will try anything to gross everybody else out anyhow. So he just does, and he's the biggest hunter in the family. And my youngest daughter, Alyssa, she's a little bit more of the animal lover side that is still grappling with where things come from and the fact that it's, we have chickens in the backyard, but if we suggested one of them was going to be dinner, she would be very, very upset. And there's I love the fact that they respond differently, and it helps me as a teacher and somebody trying to get some powerful messages across to other audiences to understand where people are coming from, and actually that's one of the huge benefits to me of having been fortunate enough to experience all these things with my family, because not only did I want to share it with them anyhow, but I got to see how they all reacted. Like, I'll give you two quick examples. So we went to Thailand I was doing some research on entomophagy, or eating insects. And I really wanted to do some work with how people eat insects in different settings. So we were in Bangkok and went to some of the regular markets, the really amazing markets where normal people in Bangkok were getting insects and what they were getting and how they were doing. So we were doing that. Then we went to this literally I think it was a 4-star, maybe 3-star restaurant called Out of the Backyard, I think it was called, but it was a restaurant focused on bugs that they were plating these bugs, and it looked like, again, you're coming from Noma or something. It was amazing. And then we went up to a village called Pitsanulak. It was quite a ways away in the north, where we spent time with a weaver ant egg farmer in their village, and we're helping with harvesting the weaver ant eggs, and then we cooked with the entire village. Anyhow, so we told Alyssa, my youngest, listen, we're going to do this and we're going to be eating a lot of bugs. She's like, no way. She was 10 at the time. And then she found out that in Bangkok, there was a place called the Unicorn Cafe. And she made a deal with us that if we took her to the Unicorn Cafe, she would eat all the bugs. So we made the mistake. So we said, okay, So we made the mistake of going to the unicorn. It was the silliest, stupid parent thing. We went to the Unicorn Cafe first. We should have done it last to hang it over our head, but we went to the Unicorn Cafe first. And I mean, it looked like a unicorn. You got to look it up after this. It looked like a unicorn threw up all over the walls. I mean, it was pink and blue, and everything came with a cone. It was horrible food. You could dress up as unicorns and eat. And the things hadn't been washed in 10 years. We did it though, and she was very happy to have done it. So then we went to the markets and we went to all these the really nice restaurants. She wouldn't eat a bug. She wouldn't eat any of it. And I was starting to get a little angry. And so about a week or so later, we ended up in that little village. And this is the big takeaway of the whole story. And we were even with a guy who had just started a company called Bugsalutely. He was Italian, living in Thailand, that was making pasta out of cricket powder. And she wouldn't even eat the pasta. So we go to this little village in the middle of nowhere, spend all day harvesting these weaver ant eggs, and the village comes out, and we were cooking together all day. We were making weaver ant egg. It was amazing. And at the end of that, she sat down and ate everything. And it wasn't like we forced her to. She just did. And the difference was, everything else was so out of context, especially for a 10-year-old. It's like, here's this 10-year-old girl from Maryland that goes into Thailand, and she sees these bugs and it looks a little bit weird. She sees this and it looks a little bit weird. She's not used to this. But then all of a sudden the communal, cooking together and that humanness that comes through with all that. And she knew she made it all. I mean, she knew what was in all of it, whether it was crickets or ant eggs or whatever. She knew it because she helped make it. She ate all of it. So that, so you ask what they think. It's crazy, but we were in again the one trip to Kenya. We were in northern Kenya, and we were working with Samburu warriors. And these people, they're like the Maasai. They're nomadic pastoralists, so they keep cattle, and they eat almost no vegetables at all. And they actually don't eat a whole lot of meat either. Almost exclusively, they subsist on blood and milk from the animals. And the blood, and I know that sounds gruesome, but they think about the blood as a renewable resource, just like we think about milk, right? They actually, so we went, and it took us days to even get, it was very, very remote. And we went up, and we get there, and we go into this village, and everybody was so amazing. And they grabbed this cow, and they put a rope around its neck and to tighten it up, almost like if we were giving blood, they'd put that rubber band around our arms. And then, its jugular got a little bigger. And then this guy walks up with this little tiny, it looked like a toy bow and arrow, and they shot right into the jugular. And this arrow was designed, the tip of it, to only go in about a 1/4 inch and pop out. So it goes in and pops out, and then the stream of blood is coming from the neck, and they collect it in a gourd. And then they went and milked another cow, and they mixed the blood half and half with the milk, and we all drank it. But the reason I bring it up is because when they shot this cow in the neck, the cow didn't even flinch. I mean, the cow's fine. The cow, they gave a quart of blood. It's like us giving a pint of blood. They took the thing off its neck, and it walked away, and they'll do another cow the next day. But my daughter saw somebody walk up to this animal with a bow and arrow, shoot it, and blood starts squirting out of its neck in this huge arc. She was mortified.
Oh no.
We should have prepped her, I think, a little bit better. She thought it was going to die, right? It wasn't going to die, but so they've reacted in different ways. But again, for me, it's been very helpful to experience it, but more importantly, experience it through all of their eyes as well.
Well, I love all of that, and I'm so thankful that you shared all your experiences with us. I could listen for hours to all of this stuff because it totally intrigues me, and I love hearing other people's stories. But if people want to look more into your stuff and what you do and see what you've been up to, how do they go about doing that?
Sure. There's a couple of ways. So we have a social media presence, Dr. Bill Schindler. So Dr. Bill Schindler on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter. And our website is eatlikeahuman.com. And I say our website, this is me and my wife and our whole family. So, and on that website, you'll find blog posts, you'll find a ton of information, and you'll also find, we do a lot of classes in person. We have pre-recorded classes, and we do live virtual classes as well. The focus, we're trying our best to empower people to be able to do all of these things in their homes, everything from foraging to fermentation to butchering, all of it. And right now we're engaged, these next several months, we're in a month-long sourdough class. Next month is a month-long butchering nose to tail class. And, these things, it goes on and on. So you can find a lot of information there on things that we've already put up and how to access us for other information. And then I have a book coming out in pre-sales in March called Eat Like a Human. And it goes through, it's a combination of our dietary past, told, the story begins again 3.5 million years ago, all the way up to modern times. And it's half that and half a cookbook and techniques.
That's awesome. Well, I can't wait for that to come out. I'm sure that I'm going to get that information from you, and I'll share it with all my friends too when it does come out.
Thank you.
But thank you so much for spending time with me today.
It was my pleasure. Thank you.